The stadium fell silent. Not because someone had hit a home run. Not because the game had ended. But because, for one terrifying split second, millions of people thought they had just watched baseball's biggest star take a 96-mile-per-hour fastball to the head. The pitch came out of the pitcher's hand looking perfectly normal. Until it didn't. Instead of diving toward the strike zone, the sinker kept running inside. Closer. Closer. Then suddenly, it was heading directly for Shohei Ohtani's helmet. Gasps echoed throughout the ballpark. Ohtani reacted on pure instinct. He threw himself backward, losing his balance as his back foot slipped out from under him. His bat flew from his hands, landing several feet away as he crashed onto the dirt beside the batter's box. The baseball whistled past the front of his helmet by mere inches before slamming into the catcher's glove. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Dodger Stadium exploded. 40,000 fans erupted at once. Some screamed. Others pointed toward the mound. Boos poured down from every section of the stadium. The atmosphere changed instantly from playoff intensity to outright chaos. The home plate umpire immediately stepped between the catcher and Ohtani as trainers rushed from the dugout. Before they even reached him, Mookie Betts was already sprinting onto the field. What was that? His voice echoed across the infield. Freddie Freeman followed close behind, not charging the mound but positioning himself between teammates and the Phillies as emotions began boiling over. Inside the Dodgers dugout, players leaned over the railing, many shouting toward the mound. Nobody knew whether the pitch had slipped. Nobody knew whether it had got away naturally. In moments like these, intent hardly matters at first. All anyone sees is baseball's biggest superstar lying in the dirt after a baseball nearly struck his head. Manager Dave Roberts wasted no time. He stormed out of the dugout, walking directly toward the umpiring crew. His face revealed exactly what every Dodger fan was feeling: concern, frustration, and a demand for answers. Roberts wasn't interested in starting a fight. He wanted an explanation. That pitch missed his head by inches, he argued. You've got to take control of this game. The umpires listened carefully while keeping both benches separated. Meanwhile, Ohtani slowly sat up. The stadium held its breath. He reached for his helmet, adjusted it, then stood. A roar echoed through Dodger Stadium. Not because he'd hit a home run. Simply because he was standing. The trainers asked if he wanted to come out of the game. He shook his head. I'm okay. Those two words spread through the stadium almost immediately. The crowd applauded. His teammates exhaled. Even some Phillies players looked relieved to see he hadn't been hurt. But the tension wasn't over. The umpires gathered near home plate for a lengthy discussion. Warnings were issued to both benches, making it clear that any further incident could lead to immediate ejections. Neither side looked particularly satisfied. The Phillies believed it had simply been a pitch that got away. The Dodgers weren't convinced. Back in the batter's box, Ohtani brushed the dirt from his jersey. He picked up his bat, took one slow practice swing, and stepped right back into the box. That decision alone said everything. He didn't ask for extra space. He didn't back away from the plate. He didn't stare at the pitcher. He simply resumed his stance as though none of the chaos had happened. From the dugout, Freddie Freeman watched carefully. He knew Ohtani well enough to recognize that expression. There was no anger. No desire for revenge. Only focus. Later, broadcasters would remark that this was what made Ohtani different. Many players would have let emotions take over after a pitch that close. Some might have shouted. Others might have pointed toward the mound. Ohtani did neither. He looked only at the pitcher, then at the catcher's glove, then back toward the mound again. His breathing slowed. His shoulders relaxed. The noise of 40,000 fans seemed to disappear. The only thing left was the next pitch. And nobody in the stadium could have imagined what was about to happen next. The ballpark was still buzzing. Even after several minutes, fans couldn't stop talking about the pitch that had nearly changed the entire game. Some believed it was simply a sinker that ran too far inside. Others were convinced there had been more to it. Television cameras replayed the moment from every possible angle. Again, and again, and again. Each replay showed the same thing. The baseball screaming toward Shohei Ohtani's helmet before missing by what looked like only a few inches. Inside the Dodgers dugout, emotions were still running high. Mookie Betts leaned against the railing, shaking his head. Way too close. Freddie Freeman remained calm, but he never took his eyes off the batter's box. Dave Roberts had returned to the dugout after his conversation with the umpires, though the frustration on his face hadn't completely disappeared. He folded his arms and watched. Like everyone else, he wanted to see one thing. How would Shohei respond? Ohtani stepped back into the batter's box with the same routine he always followed. One tap of the bat. A glance toward the pitcher. A deep breath. No dramatic gestures. No angry stare. No attempt to send a message. To anyone watching, it almost looked as if the previous pitch had never happened. The Phillies pitcher stood on the mound for a little longer than usual. He rubbed the baseball in his glove, looked toward home plate, then stepped off again. The tension was obvious. One mistake had already ignited the stadium. Another could empty both benches. Finally he came set. The catcher gave the sign. The crowd grew quiet. 96 miles per hour. The pitch came in over the outer half of the plate. Exactly where a hitter dreams of seeing it after surviving the previous pitch. Ohtani didn't try to do too much. His swing looked almost effortless. The crack of the bat echoed through Dodger Stadium. Every fan knew that sound. Outfielders barely moved. The baseball rocketed high into the California night, climbing higher and higher before disappearing deep into the right field pavilion. Home run. For one brief second, the stadium fell silent in disbelief. Then came the explosion. More than 40,000 fans leaped to their feet. The roar shook the ballpark. Teammates spilled over the dugout railing, pointing toward the sky as the baseball landed several rows beyond the fence. The television broadcast captured stunned faces throughout the crowd. Nobody could believe what they had just witnessed. Only moments after nearly being hit, Shohei Ohtani had answered with the loudest swing imaginable. As he rounded first base, he never looked toward the mound. He didn't celebrate. He didn't shout. He didn't point his bat. He simply lowered his head and ran. The same calm expression remained on his face. Around second base, Mookie Betts couldn't stop smiling. Inside the dugout, Freddie Freeman laughed and shook his head. That's Shohei. Nothing more needed to be said. When Ohtani crossed home plate, his teammates greeted him with high fives and quiet smiles. There were no exaggerated celebrations. No attempt to embarrass the opposing pitcher. The Dodgers understood something important. The home run had already said everything. Back in the broadcast booth, one commentator summed up the moment perfectly. Some players answer with words. Some answer with emotion. Shohei Ohtani answered with baseball. Even the crowd seemed to understand. The boos had disappeared. In their place came chants of Ohtani's name echoing throughout the stadium. The tension that had threatened to boil over only minutes earlier had completely changed. Not because someone had won an argument. Because one swing had changed the entire story. Without saying a single word, Shohei Ohtani had delivered the only response that mattered. The roar inside Dodger Stadium didn't fade after the home run. It grew louder. Not because Shohei Ohtani celebrated. Not because he pointed toward the Phillies dugout. Not because he shouted at anyone. The noise came from 40,000 people realizing they had just witnessed something far more powerful than revenge. Ohtani's answer hadn't come through anger. It had come through excellence. As he rounded first base, his expression barely changed. He glanced briefly toward the outfield to follow the flight of the baseball, then lowered his head and continued his steady jog around the bases. No bat flip. No stare. No gesture. Just quiet confidence. The ball disappeared into the seats, and Ohtani continued moving as if hitting a towering home run was simply another part of his job. That somehow made the moment even bigger. Fans rose to their feet. Some applauded. Others simply stood frozen, shaking their heads in disbelief. The stadium scoreboard replayed the swing again and again. Each replay made the sequence feel even more unbelievable. Moments earlier, everyone had been worried about whether baseball's biggest star had avoided a devastating injury. Now they were watching him launch one of the longest home runs of the season. The contrast was almost impossible to believe. Inside the Dodgers dugout, the mood had completely transformed. The frustration that had erupted after the dangerous pitch was gone. In its place came smiles, laughter, and a deep sense of pride. Mookie Betts leaned against the railing and laughed as Ohtani approached. Freddie Freeman simply shook his head. Sometimes there isn't anything to say. Sometimes greatness speaks for itself. Even several Phillies players couldn't hide their admiration. Competitive fire is one thing. But baseball players understand just how difficult this game truly is. To nearly wear a fastball near your helmet. To regain your composure in seconds. Then to drive the very next pitch over the fence. That requires more than talent. It requires extraordinary mental discipline. And that is one of the qualities teammates and opponents have admired most about Shohei Ohtani throughout his career. He doesn't allow one pitch to define the next one. He doesn't carry frustration into the following at-bat. Every pitch is treated like its own separate challenge. That mindset has become one of the hidden foundations of his success. Former players often say baseball is a game that punishes emotional decisions. Swing because you're angry. You chase pitches. Pitch because you're frustrated. You lose command. Play while trying to get even. The game usually humbles you. The best players understand something different. Stay calm. Stay patient. Trust your preparation. Ohtani has built his entire career around those principles. As the game continued, television cameras frequently showed fans still talking about the home run. Parents explained the moment to their children. Friends replayed videos on their phones. People weren't just discussing the distance of the blast. They were talking about when it happened. That timing made all the difference. If Ohtani had homered earlier in the game, it would have been another highlight. Because it came immediately after the frightening pitch, it became something much larger. It became a story. A reminder that the strongest response isn't always spoken. Sometimes it's earned. After the final out, reporters naturally wanted answers. They crowded around the clubhouse, hoping to hear emotional reactions. Questions came quickly. Were you angry? Did you think the pitch was intentional? What was going through your mind? Ohtani smiled politely. Then he offered the kind of answer that has defined so much of his career. He explained that baseball moves quickly. Once the next pitch is thrown, the previous one is over. His job, he said, was simply to stay ready for the next opportunity. It wasn't a dramatic quote. It wasn't designed to create headlines. But somehow it became the most memorable response of the night. Because it perfectly matched what everyone had just watched. He hadn't tried to win the argument. He had simply tried to win the next pitch. Baseball analysts spent the following days discussing the sequence from every angle. Some focused on the dangerous inside fastball. Others debated whether emotions had gotten the better of both teams. But many returned to the same conclusion. The home run mattered. The composure mattered even more. One former player summed it up beautifully. In baseball, anyone can yell. Very few people can answer pressure with perfection. That observation resonated across the sport. Young players watching the game saw something coaches spend years trying to teach. Control what you can control. You cannot choose every pitch thrown your way. You cannot control another team's emotions. You cannot erase a frightening moment. But you can control your response. Ohtani's response wasn't built on revenge. It was built on preparation. Thousands of practice swings. Countless hours in batting cages. Years of discipline. Those invisible moments became visible when he needed them most. Perhaps that's why teammates admire him so deeply. His greatest strength isn't simply hitting baseballs farther than almost anyone else. It's his ability to remain the same person no matter what the game throws at him. Success doesn't change him. Failure doesn't break him. Pressure doesn't rush him. He simply keeps preparing for the next pitch. And maybe that's the lesson hidden inside this story. People often believe greatness is measured by statistics. Home runs. Batting average. Awards, championships, those achievements matter. But character often reveals itself in the moments between the highlights, in the seconds after fear, in the choice between anger and composure, in deciding whether emotion or discipline will shape the next swing. On this fictional afternoon inspired by the qualities Shohei Ohtani is widely admired for, one towering home run became more than a run on the scoreboard. It became a symbol, a reminder that the loudest answer in sports doesn't come from shouting. It comes from preparation meeting opportunity. Because anyone can respond with words, only a few can respond with greatness. And sometimes, one silent trip around the bases says more than any speech ever could.